Okay, so the Scottish Government has announced its intention or its refusal to surrender its COVID powers. I'm not really surprised. I mean, the Scottish National Party rules with an iron fist in Scotland, despite not being the actual equivalent of a federal government, I suppose.
But they'll just do whatever they want because who's going to stop them? Boris should be stopping them,
Yes.
especially in something like this. I mean, the meme, the joke from the conspiracy theory nut jobs that you'll give them these powers and then they'll just keep them. They're just going to keep them.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, anyone with a cursory knowledge of history knows that if you grant a government powers, they hardly ever give them up willingly. It's a very, very rare thing. In fact, the exceptions to the rule are really notable. I can't remember there was a Roman general or something who took loads of power and then retired to a farm. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry.
But the Roman kings are known for this.
Yeah,
Become dictator and then just give it up.
Yeah, stuff like that is specifically notable because of its kind of flowing against the natural.
I just realised I'm going to get loads of hate for saying the Roman kings did this. Sorry, not the kings during the Republican era, but look, my ancient history isn't Cole's anyway, so leave that.
I should be able to remember as well, so I disavow myself. But anyway, I found a really good article by The Times, which is talking about how the state won't give up COVID powers easily, and it cites a case, which I'm going to read out. It's just the intro, a few paragraphs, talking about a legal case after World War II called Wilcock versus Muckle. Very antiquated surnames there, but it starts with, few readers will recall the landmark case of Wilcock versus Muckle. The story begins in Ballards Lane in North London on a cold, clear day in December 1950 when Harry Wilcock was pulled over for speeding. The officer who asked him to do so was Harold Muckle. Constable Muckle, as was the law at the time, requested that Wilcock present for inspection his national identity card. Wilcock refused on the grounds that I'm a liberal and I'm against that sort of thing.
Based. I mean, the equivalent of a sovereign citizen. So this is why I don't hate those people at all. I think they're really their heart's in the right place, fundamentally.
I don't know. Some of them are just complete morons.
Sure, they're the extremists, but I'm talking about the guys who are just like, no, my right as an Englishman to be free.
There are sovereign citizens who are like, yes, this is my vessel when they're sat in their car.
Yeah, not stuff like that. Those guys are weird.
Like using old, antiquated laws about shipping.
Well, just stuff they've made up.
Yeah. But anyway, the article continues. When Wilcock subsequently refused to appear at a police station with the document, he was prosecuted. To the local magistrates, he argued that he shouldn't have been asked for his ID cards because the conditions that led to their introduction in Britain, namely the Second World War, had expired. He was nevertheless found guilty and appealed to the High Court where, remarkably, a bench of 7 judges, including the Lord Chief Justice, heard the case. Again, he lost, but the Lord Chief Justice condemned the situation whereby the authorities used Acts of Parliaments passed in wartime for particular purposes. Now the war had ceased. Wilcock's was the last such prosecution.
Base, that's awesome. I never knew that history.
ID cards had been brought in under the National Registration Act of 1939 just after the war began. Around 45 million were issued. Their use was deemed necessary for all kinds of purposes, from identifying casualties to rationing, but in 1945, when the war ended, ID cards didn't. With rationing still in existence and a determination to track down deserters, the post-war Labour government hung on to them. Following the Wilcock case, and after Labour lost its 1951 election, the incoming government of Winston Churchill abolished them on cost grounds.
Should have done them on the moral grounds, Winston.
Yes.
But good that he did it, and the Labour Party didn't. Even in 1951, they were hanging on to it. So the war had been over for 6 years.
Yeah, but this provides a perfect case for what we're probably going to see. And I know that predictions about the future are very difficult to make, but this is one I'm pretty comfortable in making, that this is a historical trend that isn't going to change.
I was saying based the judge there, because I do actually love that as a piece of legal history. I'm not sure about whether or not it's the duty of the judge to enact the law there, because the law is obviously nonsense, but I do love that the judge made the explicit comment that just, no, this was for this period, that's over, get lost now, this needs to go. Very good on him.
Well, it's the judiciary holding Parliament accountable, which is something that
they should have found him not guilty to make the point. But...
Yeah, I mean, they're meant to interpret the law, aren't they?
It's the law.
So anyway, I'd like to go on to another one of Rory's dispatches, which talks about how the SNP have been accused of being unable to give up control of people's lives over COVID powers consolidation. And the article goes on to say, Scottish Conservatives have accused the ruling Scottish National Party of clinging on to power after Nicola Sturgeon's government revealed dangerous plans to make emergency COVID powers permanent. John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister of Scotland, unveiled a public consultation on Tuesday that would remove the March 2022 expiry date for COVID lockdown powers, described by Swinney as a demonstrable benefit to the people of Scotland. Convicts could be allowed to leave prison early under the legislation, while tenants will gain greater protection against eviction.
I love that they had the expiry in there. I also want to give credit to the Conservative MPs who were making a massive noise about that in the Westminster Parliament about this, which is that, no, we need an expiry date on this, or in 6 months this needs to be reviewed.
Yeah, well,
Consistently,
all
every 6
temporary
months.
powers should have an expiry date. I think that should be, by definition, an intrinsic property of a temporary
because
law.
it is perfect to find a tyrant, fundamentally. It's not because we trust the government to actually adhere to that thing. It is to find out when they do it and be able to point to it and say, this was the expiry, you are a tyrant, you know this is not valid.
And that is exactly what they are being here. Tyrants, really. Because they're refusing to give up powers that have been granted to them. But that's just the story of the Scottish National Party as a whole. But that's not necessarily something unique to them either. So the article continues, while the pandemic has been incredibly disruptive, said Sweeney, unveiling the plan, its urgency has forced the public services we rely on to adapt and continue and still deliver, driving the pace of digital adoption and in some cases more efficient ways of working. As we enter the recovery phase, we now have a unique opportunity to reimagine how health and social care, learning and justice services can be designed and delivered around the lives and needs of the people who use them.
No.
That sounds pretty
It's
scary, actually.
That does not reassure me at all. That sounds like a man who's got grand plans about reforming all of Scottish society around his socialist nonsense ideology.
Designed and reimagined.
Yeah, designed and redesigned. Healthcare, justice. No. This is you with some kind of grand plan about destroying the state we live in.
And going back to the Scottish Conservatives here, Murdo Fraser of the Scottish Conservatives, however, said the move would allow the SNP minister to impose sweeping powers upon society on a whim. These powers were intended to be temporary measures to deal with the pandemic. The fact that the SNP ministers are now seeking to make many of them permanent is a clear sign they are unwilling to give up their control over people's lives. It is a dangerous route to go down to allow ministers to implement sweeping powers upon society on a whim.
I was half expecting him to just be like, well, yes, we should, because Scottish Conservatives. I mean, good enough that he said that this is obvious nonsense and there was an expiry date, but I really feel like you should be attacking me more on the fact that he's obviously a tyrant. This is the expiry date. You're going over that. You're not using these powers for what they're purpose for. You're doing them for your new world making.
He should have used stronger language, really, because it is the SNP do rule like tyrants. It's not unfair to say that. I'm generally not very flippant with accusations of such things, but they have no regard for the actual people who live in their country.
They have no regard for law, order, progress, common law, just the general political traditions of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, they only care about progressing to their political utopia, following their own ideology.
And a higher plane of power.
Yes.
I mean, I was talking to a cab driver the other day, and in his opinion on it was just that he sees Nicola Sturgeon as just someone who wants to be the leader. And
well, of course.
fundamentally, I think he's right. They don't care about anything else.
So, the most shocking thing of all here is that CNN has done a good article about this. I know you're going to be surprised, but apparently a broken clock truly is right twice a day. And the article goes, European leaders seized more power during the pandemic. Few have exit plans to hand it back. And it goes on to say, hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives across Europe due to COVID-19, and many more have suffered long-term ill effects after contracting the disease. They're not the only casualties of this pandemic. And it goes on to outline how freedoms have been curtailed. So they say, in France, for instance, Parliament approved a bill last week that extends the country's state of the emergency until late September. The bill allows President Emmanuel Macron to introduce a health pass. This is back in May, by the way, showing whether someone has been vaccinated against COVID-19 or not, as well as curfews across the nation. The move was seen as controversial by some of Macron's Liberal allies. After all, instructing your citizens to be home by a certain time and tracking their medical information is hardly consistent with France's liberal traditions.
It's almost like what Biden's proposing in the state of New York has done is also
Yes.
inconsistent with American liberal traditions. CNN.
So, the Democracy Reporting International recently released a comprehensive study on how governments across the European Union had responded in the context of democracy and rule of law. France was listed as a country of significant concern for the extent to which its government had subverted legal norms.
Well, finally.
France was not the only EU nation that has backslid on democracy. In Austria, Slovenia, Belgium and Lithuania, to name a few, there are serious concerns that governments have misused existing laws to restrict the liberty of citizens. In fact, DRI listed only Spain out of the 27 EU member states as a country of no concern when it came to parliamentary or legal oversight of COVID measures.
I don't know anything about Spain, but I'm surprised we're not on that list.
Yeah, I think we deserve to be there. I think it's just because he's decided not to mention us, because I don't think we've done anything that's too different from a lot of the things on the continent. But it's kind of marking a trend here where the world has essentially given over powers to their government, and this is a very awful thing that we're going to have to contend with in the future. And as surprising as it is for a CNN article to actually get something right, there is a lot of cause for concern here, particularly in Europe, North America, where we have these traditions of liberalism and freedom, maybe not so much in some continental countries, but it's one depressing fact that I think we need to consider, and we need to be putting pressure on our governments to state explicitly when they are going to give up these specific powers that we have granted them, or most likely not granted them, but they have taken anyway. Right, this one's not going to be fun. This is going to be miserable and depressing.
It'll be like every other segment we do.